Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Mathyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam Om. So, summary of names. Value 1, Amanitwam, absence of the need to manipulate the environment in order to receive respect or acknowledgement. Value 2, Adambhitwam, absence of pretense. In other words, the absence of the need to fill in details which didn't originally take place, or to take something that is small and to make it much bigger as to enact some kind of an impressive result from the other person. Value 3, ahimsa is living an alertful life in respect to word, thought, and your action. And value 4, kshantihi, this is to have a sense of accommodation of our environment, but also of our own thoughts that we find or we sometimes classify as unpleasant. So let's go through a quick revision of ahimsa. So what is ahimsa? Again, ahimsa is living an alertful life in relation to whatever is going on in your thought. That means you're being alert about whatever comes up thought-wise. Careful, because a thought tends to spread and then calls up associations that have nothing to do with the original thought. So this is the nature of thoughts. One thought comes and it usually has a whole bunch of other thoughts associated to it. And therefore it then calls these other thoughts and then we actually lose track. So what started as an innocent thought from 5 years ago now turns out to be just a huge story of unrelated thoughts. So this means if we're not deliberate, then thoughts take us for a ride. So being deliberate and alertful, respect to our thoughts, respect to our words. So this means that we can actually create an exercise for one day. For example, in one day you say, today I choose to be highly alert of my thoughts, or I choose to be highly deliberately alert of what kind of words come out of these lips, or I choose to be highly alert. What actions do I put out into my environment? So this is a little exercise that we can all say. In fact, let's create it as an exercise. Today or tomorrow, choose. Do you want to be highly aware, highly alert of your thoughts, of your words, what you say, or of your actions? It's obviously going to depend on what occupation or what career we are involved in. So in other words, I'm bringing this up so that we can convert this into an exercise rather than just a theoretical knowledge. And the question is, why is ahimsa important? Because it trains our minds to become a lot more sensitive to the subtler realities, not only in our environment, but also in our own being. Because what happens sometimes is we miss our own, what's going on in our own bodies, in our own emotional state. And why do we miss it? Because we haven't trained ourselves to be alert, to be sensitive to whatever is going on in our bodies. In fact, the ratio of how alert and awareful you are of whatever is going on in your body, in your mind, is exact proportion to how alert you are to what is going on in your outer external environment. There's always that 1-to-1 ratio. So therefore, it always starts on the inside, and that naturally reflects on the outside. And one of the arguments that was posed in the book Value of Values by Swami Dayananda, or should we say one of the tools or means to exercising ahimsa, non-injury, is through vegetarianism. Now, it is not an absolute necessity or an absolute mandate to follow. It is just one of the tools to make the mind highly alert. And we said that vegetarianism isn't about health choices in respect to when it comes to ahimsa. So rather, vegetarianism, when it comes to in the practice of a sadhana, spiritual sadhana, becomes about honoring all life. And that life which you are honoring, that insect or cow or chicken or pig or whatever, it is that very life that makes that being sentient, is that same life that makes you, the individual, sentient. Therefore, by being more alertful to and more honoring of that life, I become more honoring automatically. It spills over to all human beings around us. In other words, our relationship changes to human beings by us having a different relationship to the kinds of foods that we eat. There's a subtle transference there. And the book also brought up an argument that a human being cannot entirely justify their carnivorous habit just by on the basis of being like an animal, because animals don't have free will. They are programmed to either be a herbivore or a carnivore. In fact, a tiger will die by die in the land, even though it could have some grass and probably survive for one extra day and therefore have some energy to grab food the next day, right? So in other words, even though it has the capacity to eat some grass to survive, it still doesn't, because it is strongly programmed to do so. Vegetarianism is just one more tool to practice ahimsa. Therefore, it is not the only path, but it is one of the paths given for a human being to make their minds more sensitive. Therefore, it is not required for knowledge to take place, even though it is just one of the many tools provided to do so. Another tool for practicing ahimsa is whenever an unconscious immoral thought comes about someone or something, and this usually comes automatically, for something in the environment triggers us, and then we just think a immoral thought or an unfair, unjust thought towards that. When that happens, then we have a choice from that moment. We can either add onto it and add more details to support that immorality, or you can in that moment choose to practice ahimsa in a form of seeing the cause of that thought, getting curious about that thought. So in other words, you're neither putting a positive, you're not going into this traditional method of, okay, let me look at the positive side of this. This is what we usually told, right? We say, okay, when a negative thought comes, then look at the positive side. This is how we're usually told. But what I'm saying here, instead of doing this black or white reversal, when it's positive, then okay, make it more positive. If it's negative, then add more positivity. Rather than doing that, rather train your mind to look into the cause of the actual occurrence. Rather get curious about what could be the origin of that thought. What makes up this thought? What is the nature of this thought? What's the color of this thought? What's the texture of this thought? So rather get curious about the nature of it rather than putting into another box of positive or negative, which is how we're usually trained to kind of deal with our realities and the world. So, and also, we also said that ahimsa isn't absolutely static. So I want to make this clear. We're not strictly saying be a vegetarian or a meat eater. It's got nothing to do with it. Again, it is just one tool to practice ahimsa. Ahimsa isn't absolutely static. In other words, it's not set in stone. So for example, suppose that you believe strongly in vegetarianism and you are a vegetarian, right? And now you go to a dentist and you got a hole there, right? So halfway, the dentist takes out that old filling. Now, you know how usually they have a TV on top and then something comes up on the news. Now, suppose something triggers the dentist and the dentist goes, yeah, all vegetarians should be killed, right? Don't you agree? Now you're sitting down with your mouth open, right? With a hole in your tooth. And then he's like, all vegetarians should be killed. And you strongly are a vegetarian, right? Now, what are you going to do? Are you going to say, I disagree? It's not like you can even talk in the first place, right? So what are you going to do? You're going to get off the seat, right, with a hole in your tooth and then just walk away. It's not like you can, say anything to him in the first place. So in other words, you just say, Okay, in other words, yeah, okay, I agree. Just for you to get the job done so I can get out of here. We then went on to kshantihi. Kshantihi is creating a space for the environment, for those around you that are close or not close, for them to express their identity while creating that space. It is still created in a space of boundaries. In other words, we cannot just create a space without boundaries. There have to be some moral boundaries in which the space is held, in which the space is created. A typical situation is with parents and children who tend to want to break the boundaries. They need to test where the boundaries are. So the parents then set up boundaries in which those children can play. But if the children cross those boundaries, then there are clear repercussions of that. So in that same way, accommodation is creating those boundaries, but at the same time, creating that space for the human evolution to take place. Because isn't it true that there's nothing more that you want than someone to create that space for you in which you can flourish, in which you can evolve and grow, while at the same time not being afraid that you're going to be judged or dismissed while you're making mistake in that space. Yeah. So in other words, accommodation is like that, creating that safe place where I have no fear of being judged or criticized or put into a box of helpless or hopeless or never going to get it, or I'm not good enough, or even good enough. We don't want those boxes, because those boxes actually create certain reactions in us, which then stop us from actually being ourselves. For example, a ballerina mode. And so she starts to dance. And then, after she finishes, then the parents go, wow, that was so beautiful. Do it again. But now the girl becomes self-conscious, and therefore she's no longer able to be that spontaneous dancer that she just was when nobody was really watching her. So in that same way, we create that space without making the person feel like they're being watched while they're being criticized. Because if that person feels that, then even though you're doing out of your best intentions to, quote, protect or keep an eye on them, that actually makes the person self-conscious, and that restricts the flow of them expressing their natural identity in which they can flourish. So accommodation is like that, like those parents who, without the need, who can enjoy their daughter having a ballerina dance, but without having the need to say, can you do that again? Because now we want to see again. In other words, they understand that while that girl was in the flow, that's good enough, right? We don't need to see it again, because the flow is one-off. Now, the question came last week is, how do we accommodate another person? How do we accommodate our environment? And we said that it's only possible if we understand that every person that you and I deal with, including you, yourself and me, we're all going through one of these three conditions. Either the person is in denial. That means I do not know what I don't know. Therefore, no matter how much you try, you're not going to contact them, right? The second is the person wants to change, however, is unable to do so, or is unwilling to do so towards you because they have a special relationship. This is common in families, right? They don't listen to you, but they listen to someone else. The third situation is whereby they're in the process of change. And now, if you do not know this, then what's going to happen? If you do not keep this in mind, what's going to happen? We will get frustrated because we will be trying and trying, but we do not know where the person stands. Then I pose a question, and that's when we ended last week. Why do we get frustrated guiding others? First of all, we do not know where the person stands. The next reason why we get frustrated to guide others, to sincerely kind of assist others, is because we do not know what we can influence and what we can't influence. You do not know where is your power of influence and where is your power of no influence. We don't even know that. Now imagine spending most of your time in those areas where you have no influence, or where your influence is weak, where your influence is minimal. Imagine a whole life going like that. And sometimes we try to influence and we kind of get through. But because we don't know what is working and what is not, then we just kind of generalize and we just try anyway. But what happens most of the time? We spend our time in those areas that we have no influence. Because when someone says no, you say, let me try harder. And it makes you more frustrated, right? Because you think, well, I haven't tried hard enough, so I need to try a little bit harder. So why do we get frustrated when it comes to guiding others, to assisting others? Because the person who is guiding doesn't know himself or herself where their capacity lies in terms of what I can influence and what I cannot influence. Where is my area of strength and where is my area of weakness? Just like, for example, can you stop the sun from shining? Absolutely not. The sun shines because it has a personality to do so, to warm. But what is the one thing that you can do? You can certainly control the exposure to how much sunlight you receive. In other words, what is accommodation? Just like the sun relationship. The sun does what it does. It has an identity of its own. The person around you has an identity of their own, just like you. And while we cannot influence certain variables about them, just like we cannot influence the sun shining, we can still minimize the exposure of, we can still influence a variable, and that is minimizing the exposure. So I cannot influence the sun's natural shine, but I can influence the sun's shine through minimizing the exposure. So in other words, we need to know clearly where can I influence and where can I not influence. Okay, so in other words, we need to discover that. You need to ask yourself, before I even try, before I even attempt to help my client or work with the clients that I do, with the colleagues, etc., before I even do that, Now, suppose you have this position of influence. You need to first ask yourself, where does my power of influence lie in the first place? Do I even know? Write it down. And where is my power of no influence? Write it down. Do you know? Because if we don't know, we mix it all up. And we do not know what's working, what's not working. And so we get frustrated, and that affects our own self-esteem. So now imagine if you knew exactly where your power of influence lies. Imagine spending your whole life in just that area alone. You know, Joseph Campbell in his book, what's it called? I read it some time ago, calls it following your excitement, I think, following your passion. In other words, being in that zone whereby you're in the right place at the right time. So similar to that, by knowing or recognizing where is my power of influence, it is almost as if finding yourself in that right time at the right place, because you're simply spending time on those strengths, which to you are completely natural and yet others find kind of difficult. Right. So this means we have to get clear. How? Get a piece of paper and a pen and write these things down, because we don't do this, do we? We just sort of kind of think about it in our heads for maybe a few seconds and then let it go and then, expect things to make a big difference. So this power of pen and paper has a huge difference. Just write things down. Where's my power of influence and where's my power of little influence? And therefore you can start to manage now or redirect your actions towards those powers of influences. What is the attitude that one can bring to the table before even attempting to guide or influence another individual? What kind of an attitude what kind of a framework can we first establish so that it creates more chance of resolution, more chance of rapport, more chance of connecting? That attitude is whereby you do not put the person into a box beforehand. If I'm working with a client, suppose the client comes to you and now the first thing you say, helpless. Hopeless, right? What's that going to do? That's going to create a silent barrier of resistance, as if the person is not going to pick that up through your body language, through your subtle words, through your subtle voice inflections and tone, etc. So in other words, we first, before dealing with anyone close to us or far from us, we first establish that framework. What framework do I wish to establish with this individual, with this environment, with this corporate meeting, with this board? And that is whereby I see everyone as value neutral, as a capable person, just like I am, just like you are, as a potential to make a difference, potential to change. And you start from that framework. Therefore, we neither put him as a positive nor a negative. Oh, they're brilliant, they're bright. Because if you say that someone's bright, even that puts the pressure on this person. No different than establishing the other view, because now they have, expectation to perform well. And if they do something wrong, then it automatically becomes so obvious and then it affects their whole state of mind. So neither, but rather this person that I'm about to deal with has the potential to change, has the potential to make a difference. And therefore, then we can go into the first step. So the first step is we need to evaluate before guiding another person, what state is one of those three is the person in? Are they in denial, willing to make a change but unable to, or are they making a difference and they're already in that flow of making a difference? Now, suppose you want to guide a person who is in denial. In other words, one who doesn't know about his or her blind spots. It could be your son, daughter, mom, dad, anyone close to you, or even your client, anyone. Suppose that, because this is how we human beings are, it's much easier to see a blind spot in someone than in ourselves. So suppose someone's in denial and we wish to sincerely guide them. We wish to kind of contribute a little bit of our knowledge. So I want to ask you, what are some methods that we could get across sincerely a helpful message to that person who is in denial and doesn't recognize that there is an issue in the first place? Let's think about this.
Perhaps you could talk about your own experience rather than saying you should do this, you should do that. You could say, I'm going to this thing called Yes Vedanta. It's really helpful for me, that sort of thing.
Yeah, this is good. This is good, because then if you turn one of the things that I learned a long time ago was so brilliant. was actually a boot camp for men. And one of the teachers said is that change your, this you, sometimes we talk about you, change that into a first person pronoun, talk into an I mode, turn it into an I, because then it's non-threatening. So talk about yourself, having gone through an experience. What else can we do to get across to someone who, through our best assessment, may be in a state of denial? I'm not saying that we're absolutely certain, because sometimes we also make a mistake. Probably they're not in denial, right? But through our best assessment.
Ask them a question that tries to get them to think about something that they haven't thought about.
Super. In other words, again, this is a not non-threatening approach, just like David spoke about. Speak about yourself, your own story, or ask him a question to instigate a potential, to open up a door to a new level of thinking.
Identify the problem and say, if somebody had that problem, how would you help them? What would you advise them to do?
Wow, that's brilliant. So do we all capture that? So in other words, sometimes what I advise is, imagine that you are parenting a disadvantaged person. Imagine that you're in a position where someone comes to you who is in a disadvantaged position. What would you advise to them? What would you say to them? Right? Act like a parent. Like, take the role model of a responsible human being. What would you say to them? So this is a brilliant idea, because it really opens up your mind to step up a new level of thinking. Sometimes what happens is our level of thinking gets stuck. And the reason is because we have no reason to open up. So this is why sometimes it's really helpful with children. It's almost like you open up new gateways to creativity, to energy and flow. One of the first things that you can do for one who may be in denial, according to your assessment, is, first of all, ask, what specifically am I attempting to reform? Do you even know? Because sometimes we don't even know. We just sort of generalize, oh, you're this. Like, what do you mean? What specifically are you talking about? So do we even know what specifically are we attempting to communicate across? You need to be clear. In fact, this is probably 80+% of the problem. The person attempting to reform is not even clear in themselves. And therefore, how is the other person now supposed to kind of relate to that? So do I know what specifically am I relating to? To what specifically am I trying to communicate here? The more specific, the more chance of communication. The more vague, the more it can go through any other direction, which yourself would then get confused and you get off track. The second is, ask yourself, why am I attempting to reform them? Is it really my business to do so? Is it my responsibility to do so? Am I trying to reform them for my sake or for their sake? This is another thing that we don't even know when attempting to reform another person. So we need to be clear. Is it bothering me? If it is, it's likely it's likely an event that's not going to be successful at all, because the self-interest is not in their well-being, it is in your own well-being. So am I trying to do this for them or for myself? Why? Why am I trying to reform this? They also have the right to a different opinion as much as I do. And that opinion came to a conclusion as solid, as firm as my own conclusion. So where's the space of saying that is more wrong and this is more correct? Where's the space for that? Because it's, from whose standpoint are you saying that? From your standpoint. From their standpoint, it's different. From a third party perspective, it's also different. So now who's right? Are they right? Are you right? Is the third party perspective more right? So in other words, we need to get rid of this tendency to evaluate who's right, who's wrong. It is a potential, a conclusion on the basis of their thought, their thinking. So in other words, we need to rather come from a space of creating a possibility of communication, opening a door to communication, rather than focusing on you're wrong, therefore let me come from that space, and therefore I want to fix you now. The third possibility or thing that we can do for a person in denial is connect them with another person who they may admire. In the Vedic culture, usually it would be the guru. So they take him to the guru, because the guru is the the third person is the value neutral aspect. So there's no emotional connections there. There's nothing holding them back. So in other words, find someone that may potentially influence them, whereby you don't really stand a chance, right? So in other words, you need to think of that. Who can get across to them? Another thing is you can share stories. We do this in the Vedic culture, Panchitantra. We have, of animals, usually they're more for kids, but it's still very helpful. In fact, I have a few books here, like Buddhist stories, and you can even share stories, your own story, as Robert, I think it was Robert said, or David said, yeah, talk about your own stories, right? So through those stories, you can create a metaphor that demonstrates how you were able to make a difference by giving it a shot, giving it a chance to explore if there is another possibility. So in other words, you're creating a story for the sake of creating a potential motivation to explore another possibility that otherwise would not be there. And as I said, if you don't have any stories, then you can relate to many stories that I have. There's a nice company called Purva Vidya, and they have Puranic tales for the young. So these are fascinating books, like animals, and the crocodile speaks to the antelope, and then the crocodile teaches the antelope a lesson, and then the antelope no longer comes near the river, and then the antelope becomes wise. So something like this, it's very fun and interesting stories to listen to. Okay, and the last resort, as always, just like with Krishna's last resort was, the carrot or the stick. In other words, now that it hasn't worked, here is the reward if you do follow through, and here is the consequence if you do not follow through. So in other words, you can just put this forward. So you can demonstrate with them maybe some stats, some similar experiences of those others who have not followed through, who have decided to stay in their little boundaries of what I know, and that's all there is to know. And you can demonstrate some examples of what was the consequence of staying in that mode, whereby the person didn't think that there was anything to address. And you can also share the rewards by demonstrating other people's biographies and stories of how they benefited by having actually, taken a chance to look into their potential personality. So that was for if a person is in denial. Now let's talk about how to guide a person who wants to change but cannot, or is defiant towards you specifically. So first of all, let's ask, what could be the possibility of someone who wants to change but cannot? What could be the reason for that? Suppose you know someone, or even yourself, and you want to change, you want to make a difference in one area, but you just can't do it. It's just so hard. Person gives up. Maybe someone told them, don't try, you're never going to get there. Maybe too old. Oh, I'm too old. I'm losing all brain cells, so I can't really make any difference. That could also stop us. Or if we're too young. Oh, I'm too young. I don't have enough experience in life, and therefore it's not working. I need to wait 5-10 more years, and then I'll get it. With a person in denial, the only option is war. Okay. Who said that? Am I reading right? Going to war is the only option. Sunita, okay. Sunita, you want to explain that? What kind of war specifically? Are we talking about maybe stepping up our attitude?
Yes, I mean, I'm talking about if the opposite person is in denial, no matter what you do, telling somebody else's story, for example, you give somebody else's example, they're not going to recognize it as something to do with them at all. They're already in denial.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, and really, it's like what Krishna did. Now, he tried 5 different things, and finally his advice to Arjuna was, take it out to them.
Sure. So in other words, so we can put war as the last option. So even though Krishna did try so many, no, he's given back 5 districts, no, the whole, Indraprastha, no. So, but also there's levels of denial. So sometimes, there's a lot of denial and there's a little bit of denial. So we never quite know where the person stands. So this is why we need to give it a chance, need to give it a shot of different possibilities. Yeah. But good, definitely, denial, sometimes, the best option is let time itself fix the problem. In other words, the person needs to go through the experiences. Time needs to show them some pains and some rewards for them to start thinking in a different way. Yeah.
True. Give it time and then go to war. Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Okay, so suppose we want to guide a person who wants to make a difference, but is unable to do so or is unwilling to do so towards you. And then I ask the question, what could be the reasons? The first one is the person lacks willpower. Willpower can also be translated as self-motivation, that self-drive, whereby I don't need anyone to hold me accountable. I myself drive myself out of my own reasons. That drive that makes you do things, irrespective of whether people are acknowledging you or not. So in other words, the person lacks the strong willpower to go through the hoops and loops that are required in order to progress onto a next phase of this transition, because it has like a phase of itself, and each phase brings obstacles, and therefore the person is not in the right environment for them to be pushed forward to overcome the many phases that are required to the other end. The second is the person lacks the method or the technique. In other words, the question here is lack of how to. I don't know how to. Now, this one's a little bit easier to fix because you can obviously guide them and show them some potential methods because there's methods of all kind of systems. So this is why, by the way, I don't dismiss systems that are created by individuals, because every system has a certain niche group, and that niche group addresses a certain mentality for a certain person. So this means we come to a place of honoring everyone's hard work who creates their individual systems in order to help others. I'm saying this because often we say sometimes, well, these are just individual systems based on ignorance, and it's not the full system. Well, the truth is this system is still helping someone get through the necessary hoop so that they may be free to move on to something else, something higher in knowledge, higher in nature, or more expensive. Okay, so number one is the person who lacks willpower, and two, lacks the method or the technique. Now, what is something that we can help or do to a person who is in this number two category? You can take them to a neutral person, someone that is not involved, not invested in one side or the other, because usually the one who wants to make a difference but is unable to do so is sometimes stuck in a mode of subjectivity. That means it's thinking and it cannot get out of that mode. So in the West, we often have this marriage counseling. So suppose two partners are in this kind of they can't see each other's standpoint because they're both stuck in their own loops. And so they need a third-party perspective, a judge, a mediator, someone that isn't invested in either. And therefore, by that, non-investing, they have clarity of both sides. And through that, they can provide a fresh, new, innovative perspective that wasn't addressed by either of the parties that came for help. So in other words, what can we do for such a person who wants to make a change but is unable to do so? You can, again, help them by taking them to a value neutral person to provide a different, fresh opinion, that different words, because sometimes someone can say it in one style and it gets across to the person, but you say it and you cannot get across. Someone else says it in their different ways, in their different language. Could be even a female, could be a male, doesn't matter. Because maybe that person trusts more males, maybe that person trusts more females. That could be alone more or enough to accept the change. If attempting to guide a person that is in the process of change, then the big mistake that we often make is, okay, so they're in the process of change. Now let me go and interfere. Let me advise them what they should do. So the proper way is to rather find out where they are in their journey, to facilitate them, rather than to kind of, let me create a new path for you, but rather ask them questions, help them clarify more of what they're doing, where they're going, what's the big vision, what's the big dream, what's the intention behind it. So in other words, you can still clarify it through questions alone. In fact, questions are so much more powerful than just getting in there and starting to advise, here's what you should do based on my vast experience. Even though you may have vast experience, the irony is it still doesn't work as well as I said earlier, engaging into a conversation, into a conversation that causes them to think. So in other words, it's a soothing, nourishing process rather than just kind of like direct, let me like go in your face and tell you what to do. Depending on which of these three the person may be, based on your analysis, based on your assessment, then we change our approach, we change our mode of influence, obviously. The last step is, suppose that you've done all you could and you have assigned enough time to cause a guidance. Then you need to let them go. You need to say, okay, I've applied enough effort, I've applied enough time, enough. Now I need to let them be as they are. Just like Krishna, he's applied enough techniques, enough methods, enough advising. Nothing's worked on Duryodhana. In fact, even Krishna couldn't convince Karna to join his 5 Pandava brothers. Karna was the son of Kunti. The 5 Pandavas brothers also, sons of Kunti and Madri. So even though Krishna tried to convince, hey, Karna, go and join your 5 strong, righteous brothers, Karna didn't listen. So in other words, Krishna knew where the boundaries are. In that same way, you need to know, I've now tried. I've done the best I could. I've invested my time, energy, and effort. Now, I need to let it go. I need to let him be, because that's called accommodation. We said accommodation earlier is creating a space whereby the person can flourish, express their identity without being fearful that you're going to judge them in the process while they are busy growing in the space which we have provided for them. Then the misconception that comes when we're talking about accommodation is don't have any expectations, right? Because I'm accommodating everyone, I'm accommodating the whole world, I'm accommodating, so just don't have any expectations, right? Let the world abuse me, let the world kind of treat me, like a dog or anything, and just don't have any expectations how to be treated. Okay, so this is one of the misconceptions that may arise from accommodation. First of all, to say don't have any expectations goes against our natural program. Everyone has expectations, one way or the other. It's inbuilt. We're social creatures. We all want to be treated in a certain way. We all want to be acknowledged. Treat me like a human being. That is an expectation. What happens is we have an improper relationship to expectations. So expectations is a natural program. For example, you surely have an expectation when you come to class. You don't want to just hear the same stuff over and over again. And I surely have an expectation when I'm teaching, right? I need people to listen to me so I can talk. So we all have expectations. But what happens is we have an improper relationship to that expectation. And this improper relationship manifests in 2 ways. In Western psychology, we call this positive transference and negative transference. So now what is positive transference? If you think of honeymoon, the honeymoon effect, that is positive transference. This is whereby I don't actually see you. I don't see you. What do I see? I see a romantic version of you. Therefore, I don't see any problems. I only see beauty. I only see smart. Oh, you're so smart. You're so beautiful. You're so, all of the perfect qualities that I would have seen onto another person. And therefore, what is there to complain about? So this is why often, sometimes when people fall in love, then there's no problems, right? They're just seeing the best of the best in each other. In other words, I'm actually not seeing you. I'm not seeing you at all. What am I seeing? I'm seeing my own notions projected onto you as a template. In other words, you become my template. Hello, template. How are you, template? You become a whiteboard, and I start to write on whiteboard. Ooh, smart, handsome, intelligent, caring, loving. In other words, I start to project all of these notions onto you, the template. So this is positive transference. And what happens even in spiritual teachings is that we even project this onto the teacher sometimes. And so when a teacher shows something that is slightly off, that is not according to our expectations, what do? We go elsewhere. And therefore, this process repeats. So, and the student also, and the teacher does the same thing to the students sometimes, is that, they're supposed to listen all the time and supposed to be impressed by everything that is being said. But when they're not, then the teacher kind of like takes it personally. So this happens on both sides always. No one's really free from this completely. The other is negative transference. This is the opposite. You are still a template for me, but instead of writing all of the romantic words, I start to write out all of my unresolved, unconscious stuff onto you. Therefore, you become my template of my unresolved past. And therefore, I start to complain. And then I start to see you as the problem rather than recognizing that I am only experiencing this emotion or this heated contraction inside me is because of my own stuff that I haven't yet looked into. Now, how do we handle when we come into a moment of negative transference towards anything? This is a perfect time to use the other person's feedback as feedback for what you can improve in, because this is a moment when they stop projecting the positive qualities and now in that kind of like twilight zone. Now they're able to kind of see clearly, just for a moment, of some blind spots that you may be undergoing. Therefore, use it as feedback of what you may, some areas to improve. At the same time, the person needs to be careful to prevent them actually projecting onto you. And you never know, but you can actually know how, because you can investigate. You can say, okay, is this really something that is that I've worked with? Okay, it is. So I worked on this specific issue a long time and they're still complaining about it. Therefore, it is likely a projection. If they're saying something that is not new to you, something that you haven't inquired into, then it is something that is worthy of considering. It is feedback for you. So positive transference and negative transference. We start with positive and then we end up with negative. And sometimes we can go back to positive and then negative. So the whole point is not to live according to these two manifestations, but rather to look at them objectively and recognize when you are projecting the positive and when you are projecting the negative. What is the proper relationship towards expectations?
Perhaps it's the same as the karma yoga, where you get more, equal, less, or opposite.
Yeah, good. So in other words, what David is saying is, at any moment, no matter what I do, how much empathy I provide, or how much of a good-hearted person you may come from, that good intention you can come from, there are always 4 possibilities. The first one is you may get more of what you expected. That's a bonus. You may get exactly what you expected. That's okay. You may get totally opposite of what you expected, or you may get less than you expected. These are the 4 realistic options in any kind of result that we may or may not receive in any action that we put out. So suppose you're working with a client or someone that's around you and you're just trying to help them or just converse. This is the reality. You put out an action. These 4 possibilities are out there. If I do not acknowledge that this is in fact the case, a probability, then frustration almost guaranteed. And then the person takes it personally. Say, well, they're not listening to me and I'm not doing a good enough job. But the reality is these 4 are always the case. So what are the 4? I get exactly what I wanted. I got more than I wanted, opposite to what I wanted, or less than I wanted. There's an example that Dayananda uses of you're standing on one side of the street and you want to catch the bus on the other. You need to go to the bus station, right? And Victor's laughing, he probably knows the story. And then, you're kind of late, so you want to cross the street. And then what happens is, your friend pulls over with a car, a Corvette, super cool car. It's like, oh yeah, I don't have to take a bus. I got more than I wanted, way more. What could happen is you can try to go to the other side and you slip on a banana peel and then you break your head and end up in hospital. So which category would that be? That would probably be you got totally opposite than you wanted, right? You catch the bus right on time. You got exactly what you wanted. And then the other option, use the example of that one. But you get the idea, right? So these 4 are always the possibilities. The other is knowing where is your sphere of influence and where is your sphere of no influence. Because if I know where and what I can influence, then my expectations are a lot more likely to be in line with what I expected. If I'm dealing with an area that I have no influence and yet I have positive and I have expectations, then what I'm going to get? Less than I wanted or totally opposite than I wanted. Therefore, disappointment guaranteed almost. So again, it goes back to the question, do I know my area of influence and my area of little or no influence at all? What are the challenges while being accommodative. There are two kinds of challenges. The first one is arguments, and the second one is confrontation. So let's talk about number one. How do you solve an argument? What is an argument? It is whereby two opinions don't match. They are incompatible with each other. And one person is trying to sincerely demonstrate their point of view, and the other one's not quite getting it, and vice versa. You're not quite, addressing their point of view. You're not kind of, taking it in. How do you address an argument?
One suggestion what people say is do this Purva Paksha, what they call, you totally understand the opposite point and just repeat it to the person so that there is no misunderstanding before you put your point. So that's
before you say something, you first take their point and you paraphrase it to make sure that you have understood their point well. And then therefore you can at least build some agreement like that. So is this what you meant?
Yeah, exactly. Pratipaksha, Purva Paksha, I guess it's called Purva Paksha.
Purva Paksha. In other words, you're establishing a common ground of communication. As I said before, the goal here is not to establish who's right and wrong. This is pretty obvious by now, but rather to keep that transaction, that flow of conversation going. Because the moment it stops, then it doesn't matter who's right, who's done all of the research in the world, and who hasn't. It's almost like there's just a non-pleasant experience on both sides. Something that we can do in an argument is first bring back the focus onto the subject matter. Because an argument tends to, how is our minds? It's scattered. That's the nature of the mind. It works in associations. It brings one thought, another thought. It brings 10,000 thoughts in. That's something that started as a leaf falling off a tree or something, right? So deliberately bring back the topic onto the very first point of disagreement ongoingly. How? By asking a question pertinent or related to that specific topic. So keep on bringing the focus back onto just that.
I found sometimes it's useful. Most arguments aren't really about the content. It's about winning according to your point of view. So I found that if I say to people, I may be wrong, I often am, help you understand how you see this, it removes the barrier between you and you then try to find a common resolution.
In other words, taking efforts to attempt to see it from their standpoint. Because again, you're acknowledging the human beingness in them. They have gone through a series of experiences. Through that experience and that time of theirs, they have concluded a certain resolution. And you're now not dealing with just one topic. You're dealing with an individual who's gone through experiences that has caused them to have this certain conclusion. So we need to address it. We need to keep that big picture. But often we lose track and we only focus on one little thing and we say wrong, wrong, wrong. But do you know how many experiences that person has actually gone through to create that conclusion? A lot. Therefore, we are honoring that about the person. If we don't, then we lose track and therefore no change takes place. Robert, do you want to?
Yeah, it's recognizing also we can't change their opinion.
This is not about establishing whose view is more right and less right, but rather creating that conversation, right? Like establishing a learning. What learning can take place through this, if any? So we talked about, ritam vadam, hitam vadam. That means you're hitting the mark. Say how it is according to your side. It is researched, ritam vadam, researched. Therefore, mention what you have researched, but they have also researched their topic. Therefore, speak from a place of acknowledging that this person has equal amount of experiences as you. Because we often think that, no, I have more experience. This is our kind of a program that we tend to fall into. But this is actually not the case because every human being has gone through sufficient amount of conclusions to form their specific opinion. The third thing that we can do is remember that the ultimate goal in any argument is peace. That's what every human being is ultimately looking for. While these two people are going, la, 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 what they're actually silently saying is, please, I hope that, I get accepted, that we kind of have a resolution, that we are friends after this. That's what the person is saying beneath all of that chatter and drama that's going on. So the ultimate goal behind any resolution is peace. You want to feel peaceful. They also want to feel peaceful. You want to feel like you can relate to this person after the argument has taken place, and they also want to feel like they can relate to you. In other words, you want to continue being friends rather than two individuals who are no longer friends just because of one small opinion out of the entire universe of infinite possibilities. Think about the silliness of that.
That's what I would go for.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I think, do you really have to be right all the time?
Yeah, this is brilliant.
And it's all about egos. And so it's just about people not feeling validated. So they have to put their viewpoint in. And ultimately, choose your battles. Do you really need to argue? You know, don't make a mountain out of a molehill for every single thing.
This is exactly right, Lorena.
So just walk away, or just let them be right. Just let them be right.
Yeah, exactly. You know, this is more and more I realize also is that, you know, in Course in Miracles, a brilliant course, it said, would you rather be happy or be right?
That's it.
I choose be happy any moment over being right.
That's me every day at work. That's me every day.
What difference does it make? Someone else is going to come across, is going to influence them in a positive way. Someone's going to influence you in a positive way. Like, just let it go, because it's one infinitesimal point in the entire universe, right?
If I hear two people arguing, sometimes I just say something completely opposite.
Yeah,
just to make it lighthearted, or you know, diffuse the situation.
To help that pattern, interrupt the pattern of the mind. Good. Okay. And also, lastly, is in an argument, remember this: behind every aggression, including what the society have named a criminal or a murderer or something that's violent, behind any form of aggression whatsoever, there is always a vulnerable person. Everyone comes with a dharma ingrained at the time of birth, and this program cannot be erased no matter what. Even a gang member wants to be respected and to be loved by his own gang. In other words, he or she has not lost touch of dharma. They are walking surely with a distorted program that's overriding dharma in respect to others except their own gang members, but still, they're still a vulnerable little child like anyone else, child of God. So if we can come from that standpoint, rather than defining them as criminal, as this, as that, rather see the biography of the person instead of the many, many behaviors that they are exuding, because behaviors are nothing but little branches, little thousands of leaves on a tree. No matter which one you address, guess what? You only addressed one little dot amongst many more. Rather look at the stem being the cause that is giving birth to all of those types of branches and types of fruits that the person is producing through his or her thinking, and therefore having those fruits for consumption. Let's talk about, when it comes to accommodating, the other challenge is confrontation. Confrontation is whereby it's like, wow, where did this come from? It's like unexpected, right? You were not prepared for it. It wasn't a gradual buildup. It was just sudden. What are some ways of dealing with a confrontation? So let me refine the question a little bit better. Should I set boundaries? Should I set intellectual boundaries? That means, no, this is not right because, and then you state out your facts, you state out your dharmic, your morality facts. Should I set intellectual boundaries, or should I share my emotional vulnerabilities? In a confrontation, these are two options. Either we present an intellectual side of ourselves, that means we set boundaries intellectually, or we share our emotional vulnerabilities. You see the question here? So which one should I do? Should I set boundaries, or should I share my emotional vulnerabilities? Okay. If the issue touches you emotionally, suppose someone says something or does something and it touches you, that first moment it touches you emotionally. Maybe it's a feeling in the heart or in the chest, or that contraction, right? We have it in different places. You know, that emotional, it really got to you. If it touches you emotionally and you respond ethically, that means you respond on an intellectual level, then what does that say about your own mind? It says that your emotions and your intellect are out of alignment, because the first thing that you felt was an emotional response. And how are you following that up? Through an intellectual reasoning. Therefore, if you do that, what's going to happen? No matter how much you intellectually then state the facts, that person is not going to listen to you. because you yourself are not congruent about how you are feeling. You have not expressed in the right frame. Whereas also it goes the opposite. Suppose the issue, it doesn't matter what the issue is. It could be an emotional issue, intellectual issue. But suppose the issue touches you ethically. That means it touches your ethics. Like, no, this is incorrect. This is, against the Samanya Dharma. This is against the universal laws. Suppose it touches you at that level, but you respond emotionally, right? And you explode, right? Emotion, like, how dare you? You just have this like outburst. Again, what does this reveal about you? Your emotions and your intellect are not in congruence. Therefore, no matter how much you respond emotionally, you're not going to touch them. They're not going to buy your perception. And because they don't buy your perception, you're going to then, what do we then think? Okay, so they're not buying my perspective. So obviously they do not understand me. So now let me judge them. Oh, you're not smart enough. Why? All because I started from the wrong, from incongruence myself. So again, if the issue touches us emotionally and we respond intellectually, then our argument is not going to be bought. They're not going to buy into our argument. If the issue touches you ethically, that means intellectually, and you respond with an outburst, with an emotional outburst, again, no matter how emotionally outburstful that response is, they're not going to be touched by that. They're not going to respond to that. And then we're going to say, well, you're so insensitive and, but no, you responded in the improper manner. So I'm showing again how complex the human being can be. And then it's not always black or white. It's not a matter of, no, you're not responding to me properly. Hey, look at yourself. Could I have started off with the wrong, incorrect frame of mind in the first place? So this means we always have to look at both sides. It is never them. This is our natural reaction. It's you. Look at yourself first. When you've done that, then you can go outside. But usually we go outside and then we go inside, or we don't even go inside. We just go outside. Also, this demonstrates this sensitivity between your emotions and your intellect. It demonstrates the need to have a sensitive mind. Now, what do we say about ahimsa? What's the purpose of ahimsa? Create a sensitive mind. Therefore, the more sensitive mind the person has, the more in touch they are with their intellect and their emotions. They know when to express the right at what time. Therefore, your influencing power becomes more automatically because you're more sensitive to your mind, because you're practicing ahimsa. Therefore, your power of influence naturally grows. I think it's chapter 2. Sthita prajna is a person firm, standing firm in their knowledge, with prajna knowledge. So that means a liberated being. So we often think that a sthita prajna is equanimous, right? So we imagine, okay, so they're, equanimous. So that means they're responding equanimous to an intellectual issue. They're also responding equanimous to an emotional issue. Absolutely not. Equanimous simply means I am objective. In my objectivity, I let this emotion come out. In my objectivity, I let this intellectual opinion also come out. But I never get affected by either. In other words, the person is able to quickly revert back to the duty at hand instead of getting enmeshed into their own response. Enmeshed in my intellectual argument, finished, gone, lost myself. Enmeshed in my emotional explosion, finished, lost myself. Rather, objective. In that objectivity, I'm able to witness both the person called whatever your name is being emotional, but also the person, your name, being responding intellectually. So in other words, never losing touch of that objectivity, because the moment we lose touch of that, then all reason goes away. And therefore now you're not even able to express the right emotion because the reason has gone away. Okay, so finally, what is the summary of accommodation? The key to accommodation is responding to the person's biography. This is very important to remember. Respond to the person's biography, to their history, and not to their behavior, because the behavior is an effect. The biography is the cause. Therefore, we're seeing the biography, we're seeing the person's potential background rather than the many types of behaviors that the person is constantly outputting on a day-to-day basis. See, we need to be in touch with our emotions and our intellect. That means if we try to hold in our emotions and then respond rationally, then this means there's an incongruence in that individual. That means they're kind of holding one side of themselves back and they're giving more strength to the other. But if you look at them both, how is one better than the other when they're both one? They're just one personality from two different aspects, and they both need to be alive. Value 1, amanitwam, humility. Value 2, adambhitwam, absence of pretense. Value 3, ahimsa, non-injury. Value 4, kshantihi, accommodation. Value 5, arjavam, straightforwardness.
Arjavam. Arjavam means straightness. When used as a value, the straightness or arjava is similar to the English word rectitude, from the Latin rectus, straight, which means conduct in accordance with one's ethical standards. So arjava means an alignment of thought, word, and deed. When there is rijubhava, arrow-like straightness between a physical action and the word, or between the word and the thought, that alignment is called arjava. What is non-alignment of thought, word, or act? When I think one thing and say another, or when I say one thing and do another, or when I think one thing, say another, and do even a third thing, all of these constitute a non-alignment on my part of thoughts, words, and deeds. The avoidance of this disconnection, this division between word and action, word and thought, and action and thought is arjava. Arjava can be considered an extension of satyavachan, truthful speech. Arjava covers more ground. It includes not just vachan, speech, but also thoughts and action. For arjava, my actions must be true to my words, and my words true to my thoughts.
What is the importance of alignment between thought, word, and deed? By non-alignment, I become disintegrated. I am no longer a whole person. When there is conflict between my values, my thoughts, my words, and my acts, I suffer a destructive split in myself. I become splintered. I am not together. If there is a gulf between me, the thinker, and me, the speaker, or the doer, the result will be a restless mind troubled by guilt and conflicts. This kind of mind is not a quiet, receptive instrument ready for learning anything, for achieving any end. For such a mind, self-knowledge is a far cry. To be prepared to listen to the teaching of Vedanta, you need to be together, no split. Therefore, arjava, the alignment of thought, word, and deed, is included as one of.
So what is the absence of arjavam? The absence is whereby the thought, what I think, words, what I say, and deed, the actions, when all three of them, they don't share a unified synergy. Synergy means a collection of parts. That means they're all out of alignment with each other. That means they're all betraying each other. Three different personalities. One's not following the words, I say one thing, or I think one thing, I say another, but my body language is something totally off. So in other words, I'm not straightforward. I'm kind of like confusing. And the absence of this arjavam, what's the result of it? The first one is there's inner conflict, because see, the person is like a synergy, and they have three personalities. They have thought, word, and deed. If these three are out of alignment, then that creates an inner split. And that inner split then produces a whole series of problems down the road. You become uninfluential. Because if you're not able to be straight in yourself, this comes across. Say, whoa, he or she doesn't quite, they're not quite in alignment with what they're saying. There was one statement where Milton Erickson said, if you do not believe that you can make a difference in your client is not going to make a difference no matter how hard you try. So in that same way, if I'm not congruent with myself, no matter how much knowledge you have, you're simply not going to be influential enough. People are not going to take you seriously. The other result of not having straightforwardness is you're not trustworthy in the eyes of others. Because if you say one thing, but do something else, this comes across. People capture this easily. And therefore, the person loses a sense of authority, trustworthiness, and therefore they stop asking you. And you think, well, now I'm free. but you're only free because no one's trusting you. Therefore, they don't want to ask you anymore for any favors. There was one line that said, the most trustworthy person is the one that takes on the most duties, because everyone goes up to them because they can rely on that person. Now, an example of violation of straightforwardness is to say, for example, I agree with you, but then a few moments later, you see me doing something else. Therefore, what happens now? Your perception of me has modified in accordance with my non-congruence with my speech and my action. Therefore, who then suffers? I do. Therefore, I lose my trustworthiness in your eyes. Another very common one is, hey, I'll be right down in 1 minute. I'll be down in 1 minute. You know where this is going, right? But 5 minutes later, you're still waiting for the person. Small things like this, they make a huge difference. So in other words, we're not punctual. We say one thing, but we don't follow through. The least you can say is, I'll be down in 1 minute plus minus. That's one improvement more. But we don't even say, we say like confidently, I'll be down in 1 minute, as if you're definitive. But then when that gets violated, it hurts the other person, and therefore they now lose trust in you. So how do we deal with this? Suppose that someone has said something, but it is something else. We need to call it out. We need to say it. Hey, you said this, but now you're doing something else. Do you want to explain? It could be, is there a reason for this? Not confrontational, of course, because then the person puts up resistance, but you need to call this behavior out. Because if we don't, what are we subtly doing? We're giving them permission and saying, it's okay. You can say one thing, but you can do something else. Therefore, it now also becomes your own papa karma, because you could have done something, but you didn't. You didn't stand up for what you knew should have been done. And that is to call out the person on their lack of punctuality. Therefore, we need to be assertive whenever we pick up someone's behavior being non-congruent between their thought, word, and speech, because you're helping them in a non-confrontational way. You can say, could you give it a reason for this? Could you explain, or something like that? So why do we not then follow through what we say and what we do? Why do we not follow through that in ourselves, but also towards others? What could be some reasons?
Lack of willpower.
Lack of willpower. So in other words, what does this expose now? This is not the first time it's happened. It reveals that even though it's happened last time, I have not looked into that issue. And therefore, I let it slip, and now it becomes a new normal in the future. So if it's seen today, it not only reflects the fault of today, it also reflects the history of the person, that it's happened most likely before, and therefore it has not been called out by someone else, and therefore they didn't give the chance to the person to look into it. Therefore, lack of willpower means it is yet undeveloped. I haven't looked into this sense of what is it that moves me, and why should I be congruent in the first place? Why? For whom? I need to be clear in that in the first place. Towards yourself. Because if the person is incongruent towards others, what does that reflect? I'm incongruent towards myself. So this means I'm listening to one thing, but I'm thinking about something else. And therefore, I do not capture the fullness of the teaching. That is also reflective of my incongruence to be straight with others around me. So lack of willpower, also lack of discipline. So these are the two. Lack of discipline means is the person doesn't have that sense of drive, that sense of holding themselves accountable without the need for someone to be around them, to hold their hand like a parent or something. So this means it still has some chance of improvement. So the question is, how do you improve it then? The first thing, the simplest way is through punctuality. Take something simple. Maybe for one day, say I'm going to practice punctuality. What I say, I'm intentionally going to make sure it gets done at that particular time. And if it doesn't, I'm going to be verbal about it. I'm going to say, hey, I am late by 1 minute. So what is some of the solutions to following through? Because we just said that the person doesn't follow through because of willpower and lack of discipline. What is the solution to following through? That means, what is the solution to aligning our thought, words, and deeds so they are integrated? The first is you can have a support group. That means we get people around us. We depend on others to hold us accountable. Someone that we someone that we admire. The second is you can chunk big things into small digestible chunks. Sometimes we don't follow through because our vision initially was way bigger than we could have managed in the first place. So in other words, we set unrealistic expectations according to our capacities. We don't even know what our capacities are. So we just say, nope, this person has done it, so I can also do it. But the reality is not really, because you need to first walk before you can run. So in other words, we can chunk huge things into small, bite-sized, digestible chunks, and then only address those chunks. When it's done, then move on to the next chunk. For example, how do you write a book? Big project, right? So many chapters. Just start writing down, whatever. Then put it together, first draft, right? Rearrange it once. Okay, it's still not perfect. Fine. Rearrange it twice. Okay, still not perfect. Fine. Rearrange it again. Instead of going, oh, it's not working, and it's, in other words, just focus on rearranging once. And then focus on rearranging twice. And then 3 times. Instead of going, oh, I need to be at the end. The end is way too far, way too big to manage right now. Therefore, how do we get ourselves to follow through? By breaking up complex, big visions into small, manageable parts that actually inspire you, that are easy for you. If they are way big, way past our sense of what I can do, it's likely that the person through that alone is not going to follow through because it's huge, right? So then, in other words, we set up ourselves for failure just by willing to attain big things that we haven't even learned how to manage small things. In business, it's a common, when a youngster, for example, wants to make money in business, how do they start? I want to make $1 million, a year. You ask them one question. Have you learned how to make $10 by yourself? No. So you want to make $4,000 or $5,000 a day. You want to make $4,000 a day. You don't even know how to make $10 a day. Therefore, first focus on how to make $10 a day. And then when you get enough confidence, move it on to $30 a day and then $50 a day. So this is called breaking huge visions into something that is realistic, manageable right now. The other way to follow through is getting really clear on the rewards and the benefits. Ask yourself, what is the benefit? What is the enjoyment once I follow through to this all the way to the end? And keep that benefit, that big vision at all times. In other words, use that as a big motor, as a push, as a slight push behind to keep us moving forward. So we need to be clear. How exactly will I benefit? Who's going to benefit? What difference is it going to make? Who is it going to inspire? The other way is, in Japan, we call this Kaizen, small incremental improvements. So what we often do is, suppose you want to get slimmer, right, or get fit. So what do we say? Okay, let's go and exercise for 15 minutes. But we haven't even learned to exercise to be okay with our bodies, we haven't even tested ourselves at 5 minutes. So when we go out 15 minutes, we exercise and then next day sore. We get discouraged. No, exercise is not for me. So what does Kaizen say? Small, deliberate, incremental improvements. For example, suppose you have a goal of exercise. Then you do something ridiculously small. You say, today I'm going to exercise for 10 seconds. Can you do that? 10 seconds? Absolutely. Tomorrow, 15 seconds. Then 25 seconds. So what does this do to your brain? It says to your brain, you know what, man? This is ridiculous. You keep on increasing for 5 seconds a day. You can do way better than this. In other words, you convince yourself that you can indeed do it. This is called reverse psychology. Instead of going full out and then next day, no, I can't do this. So small incremental improvements have an exponentially profound impact. They build up like compound interest. And therefore, it becomes so natural to then do 15 seconds, 20 seconds, 1 minute. Oh boy, 1 minute, 20 seconds, 1 minute, 30 seconds. This is so easy. I can hardly wait till I get to 15 minutes, but you don't. You keep on going deliberately small, because every time it builds confidence and it becomes therefore easier to do more the next day. So this is, again, reverse psychology, how we convince ourselves that we can indeed do it instead of doing the traditional way of just jumping right into it, Kaizen. And next week, we will move on to value 6, Acharyopasanam, service, devotion to the teacher. Okay, so let's revise again all of the values. Value 1, amanitvam, humility. Value 2, adambhitvam, absence of pretense. Value 3, ahimsa, non-injury. Value 4, kshantihi, accommodation. Value 5, arjavam, straightforwardness, congruence between your thought, word, and speech.
One that we just did, the straightforwardness. I guess sometimes that could, the lack of straightforwardness could be due to the situation, so that perhaps it's maybe not always short-term, but a short-term view of what the situation is. So you think it might be best not to speak up or against something, just that rock the boat concept, something like that. Or in a group situation, you're thinking what might be best for the group or something like that. It being involved in activism and politics, it can get really, if everyone's really straightforward, it can just create conflict, just as much conflict as if everyone just says, I agree. I haven't really thought that out completely, so
Sure.
It's a bit vague. Yeah.
So straightforwardness is it's not only about say what you think, but also just being honest in your response, being assertive in your response, instead of holding back out of some fear or some imagination how things may turn out. Therefore, you're just being an honest person in terms of your response. And in that honesty, you're still kind of, looking around, and you're being careful of being sensitive to the environment enough as to not to escalate the situation, as in your example, for example, politics, right? So suppose you want to be straightforward in politics, right? Ocean of sharks. Everyone's got their strong opinion there. If you say one opinion, then people are going to be writing social posts about you in few moments. So in other words, you're still keeping that in mind, being sensitive enough to accommodate people, but at the same time, not kind of submissive. Oh, let me just please people now. It's not about pleasing, but still stating your opinion that you strongly stand for based on your research. So that's called straightforwardness, right? Being careful, at the same time, not holding back about what you do know, where you can contribute.
There's actually, with politicians, you just mentioned that, there's people that study body language of politicians, and there's certain things that when someone's lying, like a politician, they'll like rub their ear or something, and it's noted. Like body language is actually a primal thing that people overlook a lot of the time.
Indeed.
But politicians actually learn body language to be on top of that.
Yeah.
So it aligns with what they're saying, like their body motions.
See, that's one way to learn body language so I can use it intentionally. The other way is just by being congruent with your thought, word, and action. Your body is naturally going to demonstrate the right influencing markers anyway. So in other words,
if you're sincere, but
if you're sincere,
not sincere,
okay,
like a
now
politician,
politics.
that's what I mean.
Okay, like I said, it's slightly different intention there. So this means that for that intention, now I have to learn body language for the sake of influence. Yeah. And the other way, of course, is to be sincere, and therefore you don't need a body language course. You just have body language automatically.
With dementia, you've got to look at their body language to try and understand what they want. So it's a very useful tool to know body language.
In the case of reading body language, it's highly helpful, because suppose that someone cannot express themselves through words. Mm-hmm. They're still giving themselves away through body language. That's so therefore, by knowing the body language, you can help them to really come to that, what they may be holding back. In fact, the cops are experts at this. There's a program that I've done once called Verbal Judo. And verbal judo is by a cop who had a huge influence across America, because he often found on the streets, he was dealing with, you know, the most intolerable types, with drunk, youthful, testosterone-driven types, right? And he found that kind of putting this authoritative, I'm the cop, you know, give me your license, it didn't work. So then what he decided to do was he decided to learn how to cooperate in the maximum possible effective way with the least cooperable types, who are, you know, intoxicated through alcohol. And this is something I can talk about next week. But one of the things that he says is he has this formula. And the first formula is, he says, give me your license because. And just by giving a reason, 70% plus minus already complied through that alone. He looks at body language to predict whether the person is about to strike, or what the person is thinking while the cop is communicating. So therefore the cop changes the words according to the subtle markers of the body language. So therefore he's able to lead the conversation in a non-confrontational way. So that's very useful. Yeah.
Also with autism and disability, because I used to be a disability carer. The kids that had autism, very hard to understand what they want. So that's kind of where I started learning it. And then obviously when I started working with people with dementia, it worked for that same non-verbal people, and it worked in that way, just to know what they want, because they can't express it.
Sarve bhavantu sukhinaha, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.